Hi, I'm Jenny Gabriel, and this is a video tutorial for a placemat, and the binding doesn't require any hand sewing, which is why I wanted to show you this tutorial. If you'll turn your attention to my wonderful finished product, and you can zoom in, and I use decorative stitches when I did the binding, and the corners are mitered, but I didn't have to finish it with hand stitching, which is the magic of what I'm going to show you today. First thing you want to do is you want to start off with cutting out your fabric, getting your fabric prepared. So you're going to need to cut a rectangle that is 14 by 20, and that's going to be your front fabric. You're going to have also the same size, 14 by 20 for the batting, 14 by 20 for the backing. Then you're going to mark the front fabric with, if you can see this pink chalk lines, this grid. So what I did to mark mine was I just used my cutting mat that has a 45-degree angle on it already, and I lined up my mat with it so that the straight edge was on one of these straight blue lines, and then that diagonal 45-degree line was going through the corner of my fabric. That helped me get my placement. I used my little quilting guide ruler, lined it up with the edge of this 45-degree angle line, used my chalk pencil, and I marked. Then I moved over 2 inches from that first line, and I marked again, and so forth. Just marked every 2 inches, and then also went this way with my 2 inches. Then I rotated my mat to get the other corner lined up on the 45-degree angle line, and the straight edge of this mat is also on the blue line here. And then I used it again, lining up my ruler on my I call these cheater lines, but I lined it up and I got my first one down, and then from there I was able to do every 2 inches of a line. Once your grid is marked, you're going to want to pin every so often through all the grid squares. I like to use curved safety pins and this little tool that helps me not hurt my fingers too much when you're doing a lot of pinning. So what I do is I just stick that safety pin right in there through all the layers. The curve in it lets me kind of scoop, which saves a little time, and then I use this little tool to help me pin. Saves your fingertips. Once you have all your safety pins in, this is plenty, then you're going to take it to the sewing machine and you're going to start quilting. Set your sewing machine for a stitch length of about 2.5 or 3 millimeters. I like to start on one corner and come down, then do the other corner and come down, and then I work my way out from there, this way and that way, etc., until all my lines are quilted. Or you can use that Nancy Zeman pivot and turn method that's on our blog. You can visit our blog at sewbackoutletblog.com. Okay, after your placemat is quilted, you're going to take all the straight pins out and you're going to true it up. True it up. You're going to trim it down. It started off as a 14 by 20, and as you can see, once it's stitched, the layers do shift. So you have some uglies on the edges, so you can trim it down. And so I trimmed it down so that it became a 13 by 19 inch placemat. Once you have your fabric prepared, you're ready to do the bias binding. Because I'm keeping my mat square, I didn't cut mine on the bias. I'm using straight grain strips instead, binding strips instead. Also, there's a couple of different ways to do binding strips. I'm doing the double fold strips. And let me just show you. This is a double fold strip. What I have is, it starts off really wide, and then you fold it in half, and then we're going to be lining the raw edge up with the raw edge of the project, sewing it down and wrapping it around to the back. That's the general idea, okay? But how do you know how much fabric to get, how many strips to cut, blah blah blah. I recommend this book. It is a great little resource for helping you figure out what you need. So I was looking at what's the perimeter of my mat, and that was 20 plus 14 plus 20 plus 14. Add that all up, then you multiply that by however many placemats you're making. That helps you know how many inches of bias binding you're gonna need. Binding that you're gonna need. And then you can look in this little book and it'll tell you how many yards of fabric you need, how many strips of fabric you need to cut, and it also tells you how wide to cut them depending on the finished result. I wanted this result of the 3/4 inch wide look. I didn't want skinnier than that. So because I want it to look like this, my strips need to be cut 4 and 5/8 inches wide. I'm gonna need 7 of those strips, and I'm gonna need to join them together to get one really long strip. And the amount of fabric you're gonna need is 1 1/8 yard. Okay, so 1 1/8 yard, and we're not cutting on the diagonal, we're not cutting on the bias, we're cutting straight strips from selvage to selvage. Okay, so once you have cut your 7 strips, this is how I like to piece my straight grain strips together. First, you're gonna take one of the strips, lay it wrong side up, and you're gonna fold it, one end of it at a 45-degree angle. And again, you can see I'm using my little marks on my mat to help me do that. I'm putting one straight edge on a blue line here so it's straight, and then I'm folding it and I'm just making sure, and then you can finger press it or you can press that. Okay, that helps me make sure I got that diagonal line. Then I'm going to take my another strip and I'm going to lay it right side up, and I'm laying it so that it's, again, that 45-degree line is gonna kind of go through it here, okay? Then the next thing I'm gonna do, this just really helps me avoid having, when I unfold it, having it off kilter. Then I'm gonna lay this one that I previously folded, I'm gonna lay it on top of the other one. And what I'm looking at when I'm doing this, I'm looking at this straight blue line on my mat. Okay, and that's helping me go, yay, I'm straight, I'm not going to be crooked when I sew this. I'm going to hold this steady where I have it and everything. I don't want things to shift. I'm going to hold it steady and put a few pins in it. There's more than one way to do bias strips or sew this together. This is the way I do it, because I tend to have them off kilter if I don't do it this way. Okay, I'm going to take a moment. I don't usually mark the crease, but because I'm with you and I want you to be able to see it, I'm going to mark in this little diagonal crease so you can see it. Okay, that little crease gets stitched. We'll just pretend I stitched it. Stitch, stitch, stitch. Great. Then after it's stitched, it's going to look like these. Okay, and what I do after I stitch it is I trimmed away the excess, because I do have excess fabric. I just trim that away, and so this is what I have left. Okay, once that's done, then you press your seams one way or the other because they're here.